Well, here I am again, trying to go on and continue with my little story that Curtis has asked me to film. I, I was very disappointed in the quality of my first effort because I didn't realize how self-conscious I was about recording on film. And so I learned I don't need to fuss with my nose, and I don't need to be so absolutely frozen in one position. Well, anyhow, I want to tell you a little bit about our arrival in New Mexico. We came in 1964, and we have spent over 50 years in this state. So of course much of our life, well over half of our lifetime, has been spent here. We first wanted to come to New Mexico because we really liked the climate. It seemed to be best for my family's health, allergy-wise and that type of thing. Actually, we were here for about 5 years before Bob died. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about his death. It was a very traumatic period for our family, particularly for my 4 children. And I would let them tell you a little bit more about how their experience influenced their whole life. Of course, Bob and I had a very close and a wonderful relationship. Our romance had flourished over the years, and we were very, very happily married. The 4 children had grown to a point where in 1969, when Bob died, Karen was already away from home. Curtis was a high school senior. Louis was younger by about 2.5 to 3 years. Dennis was 11 and a half or 12. So it was a very, very difficult time for the 3 boys. Karen was very close to her father, so her loss was deeply felt. I was faced with the challenge of trying to deal with my own grief, as well as help them to adjust to the life without a father. We have come through it, I shouldn't say without any scars. I'm sure there have been emotional scars from that loss. But we decided, it was my decision after his death to stay in Las Vegas. The community had been very supportive and close to us all, and we felt quite bonded to them. So my decision was that we would stay in Las Vegas and the boys would finish school there. I had an opportunity shortly after Bob's death to resume my career in dietetics or in institution management. And so I took the opportunity to go to Santa Fe and work with school feeding, which was often referred to as the school lunch program it was actually much broader than that, and I worked in the State Department of Education for about 8 years before I left to go back to my former life as a married woman and a homemaker. However, I loved that job, and it was probably a very meaningful experience because of the wonderful friends I had through that profession, as well as the experience of working with schools all over the state. I was the state director here in New Mexico, which gave me broad contacts with not only the various schools throughout the state, but as other state directors through the nation. I did some legislative work going back to Washington, testifying on behalf of child nutrition programs. One of the things that we had enjoyed very much as a family was the travel we took. I did a great deal of traveling in my job as state director, and I drove all over the state with the state vehicle, visiting schools, and then I often flew back to Washington or to other parts of the country where the National Legislative Committee might be meeting. I was a member of this legislative committee for probably about 5 years. I loved that job, and I loved the people that I was working with. So it was a very fruitful experience. But it was hard for the boys. They were still at home, and I did have an elderly lady who came and stayed with them, but that was at best not the greatest arrangement because the boys were teenage boys with all the pep and energy that you could imagine boys having at that age, and it was not easy for them to be totally tolerant of her shortcomings, shall we say. The boys and I took some trips. We went back east. We traveled out west and visited the Bogles in Chandler, and we spent time visiting other dear friends along the way. So it was a good life. The boys were very active in athletics, playing football and doing a lot of things with outdoor camping with their horses. It was a busy time, and I will let them ask me some questions to try to highlight some of the things that we might have done at that time. As time went on, along in about 1972 or 3, Louis expressed a great interest in learning more about horsemanship, and so because of friends we had that were able to help us make this contact, he went to a school in the East there in upstate New York, where he earned an associate degree and also earned what was called a certification as an equitation specialist or trainer. He trained and sold and taught horsemanship for 25, 30 years after that. He became a very efficient contractor also during that time, and we became very actively involved in many community projects simply because he was very resourceful and enjoyed that type of work. Dennis was an excellent carpenter and woodworker, and after he graduated from the University of New Mexico, he went to work with the movie industry, building sets and doing some custom work in woodworking. By that time, of course, he was married and had a family, so he was very much involved with his sons, and we had many wonderful visits and trips together. Louis became very interested. He was married at that time after he got out of the riding school. He was married to Susan, his cousin, and they had quite an active business, teaching, showing, and competing in various horse events. This marriage lasted about 12 years. Susan was highly motivated, very creative, very intelligent woman. She was Jim, Bob's brother's oldest child, and she was a very gifted person intellectually, socially. To this day, Susan has been very close to all of our family, and very close to me especially. She had come out to New Mexico to visit me in 1970, I think about a year after Bob's death. She fell in love with the country, and at this time her first marriage was not very stable, and she and her husband were separated, and so she moved out to New Mexico and taught in the Las Vegas schools. She was graduated from the University of Michigan in French and was a very capable teacher. So after I had left Las Vegas, that is, my work took me to Santa Fe and all over the state, I became a registered dietitian. I went back to college to get a couple of courses that I needed in order to qualify me to be registered as a dietitian for hospital and educational purposes. I continued to work with some of the food manufacturers in helping to demonstrate and experiment with some of their equipment that was particularly useful in schools. I'm not ready to say that I wasn't ready really to say I was ready to retire. And of course, about that time, John came into my life, and we had a very happy and meaningful friendship, including his 4 children, my 4 children, and we had a great time helping them to get acquainted. John was a man that I had known as a young girl in Ames growing up, and although we were not particularly close at that time, because we were separated by only a year or so, but class-wise, he was ahead of me in school, and in those years there was a very strong definition between classes, so you didn't really know the older people, as well as you might have otherwise. So anyhow, we first became reacquainted in 1967, I believe. No, pardon me, 1971. It was a couple, no, I'm wrong about that. I was a widow after Bob's death until 1976, so there was about 7 or 8 years when I was raising the boys pretty much by myself. Karen had married and lived away from home, so we were spent a lot of time, you know, just trying to hold our lives together. And Curtis had gone, he had become enlisted during the Vietnam War, but soon realized that he was not cut out to bear arms, and so he presented his defense to the Board of Examiners, or the court-martial board of the Army, and amazingly was able to attain status as a conscientious objector. So he came back to Iowa, or to New Mexico, and got a job with AT&T, which he stayed with for several years. Later in life, Curtis, talented as an actor and as an entertainer, stood him in very good stead, and he was very successful in providing in being provided with opportunities for small bit parts in movies. He never really treated it as a full-time vocation, but later on, because of his entrepreneurial talents, he developed a film rental business in Las Vegas, renting out movies to small communities. At one time, he and the partner that worked with him had, I think, 49 little outlets all over northern New Mexico where they sent films for rental. That was before the big-time rental business became really overwhelming to any small operators. And so Curtis and his friend got out of that rather quickly, and in a very timely fashion, because they didn't lose anything by doing that. So then he became more involved with the film industry. In the meantime, Dennis had been working as a contractor, doing special custom work. His education at the university was in the field of general studies, which was not particularly creative or productive, but it did give him an opportunity to and broaden his horizons. We enjoyed having lots of lovely friends all through this period. And then when we came to New Mexico in 1964, just 2 or 3 months after the Kennedy assassination, we settled in here, and as I mentioned earlier, Bob was very effective in the ministry of the Presbyterian Church in this community, and did a great deal of rehabilitative counseling for men who are suffering from alcoholism, or with couples who were looking for means or avenue to strengthen their family life and marriage. So he was, at the time of his untimely death, he was very strongly tied into the life of the community, and so at the time that he died, the community was devastated by his loss, and we had many, many friends all over Las Vegas. He was active in local service clubs and things of this nature also. I think I'm going to stop for a while, so I'll turn this off and maybe come back to it later. See if I did any better.